Hi, and welcome to this mini lecture on leadership. We'll cover the main themes of the notes as a recap on the topic of leadership. So when you watch this, you might want to have already read through the notes. So the first type of leadership theory that we look at in this section, is trait theories, which were around from 1920 to 1950 predominantly. And the main idea of these theories are that great leaders are born, not made. So you don't create a leader, you can't do anything. You either have the characteristics that make you a good leader when you're born, or you don't. So the key work of the trait theories has been in identifying whether, and if so, which traits make someone a good leader and to what extent. And the kind of assumptions of trait theories, therefore, are that traits are innate, meaning that traits are something people are born with and they can't be acquired, and those traits will or won't make you a good leader. And the output of this research type is that numerous lists have been produced over the years, often with common features, but with no universal agreement on a particular list of traits that make a good leader. In more recent years, researchers have tried to produce meta-analyses, which are studies bringing together lots of previous studies to try to extrapolate common patterns of leadership traits, so to try and find those patterns within those studies. And so we look at a particular example of trait theory research when we look at Judge et al.'s research from 2002. They performed a meta-analysis, so that's an analysis of all the other studies using the trait perspective of leadership. And so meta-analysis, then, reminder, is analysing lots of data gathered by others to try to discover broader patterns and ideas. And they thought a sensible way of doing it was organising other people's findings around the big 5 personality traits. So these are the traits that are seen to be to some degree within everyone. Are you extrovert, or are you introvert, or somewhere on that scale? Are you open or closed, and so forth? So they organised the findings around these big 5 personality traits to see whether there were any links. And their research found that the previous studies had shown that leaders tend to be high in extroversion, so quite outgoing, high in openness, so openness to people, new things, ideas, high in conscientiousness, so they are committed, they work hard, they do what they said they're going to, and they're low in neuroticism. Whilst agreeableness was found to be largely irrelevant. It doesn't matter how agreeable or not they are. But the problem with this idea of the trait approach is that you are seen to be born as a leader or not. But surely we have all seen people who get developed into better leaders than they originally were. And so behavioural approaches recognise this and focus in on which behaviours great leaders seem to use. So we take our first leap then from trait leadership theories to behavioural leadership theories. And behavioural approaches came about when researchers realised that leadership is comprised of 2 general kinds of behaviours. The first group being relationship behaviours. So they're the behaviours that leaders use that enable followers to feel comfortable with each other and the situation and themselves. And then they also show task behaviours, which is where they enable goal accomplishment, where they help group members to achieve their objectives. The relationship behaviours are focused on their relationship between themselves and followers, and task behaviours are focused on the tasks that their group members are trying to achieve. And the research shows that leaders can and should combine these 2 types of behaviours to influence followers to achieve a goal. Now, this finding was carried across multiple studies, so quite reliable, quite robust to suggest that leadership involves these 2 elements. There were studies in the Ohio State University and the University of Michigan in the 1940s, and then again Blake and Mouton in the 1960s. So 3 different areas at least have identified leadership as being comprised of these 2 behavioural types. And if we look specifically at the work of Blake and Mouton, they combined these ideas into the managerial or the leadership grid. It used to be called the managerial grid. They updated the name. There's more money in leadership if you're a consultant, so it's a good idea to update the name from management to leadership. And they said that managers can have 2 behavioural types: concern for people and concern for results. So concern for people aligns with relationship behaviours, concern for results aligns with task behaviours. And they said that an ideal manager will be good at both. So they will be able to use both concern for people and concern for results to a high degree. So be a team manager. The other types of management that are identified there, so country club management, impoverished management, authority compliance management, and middle of the road management, they aren't seen to be as desirable as team management. Country club management is where the manager or the leader is just concerned with people and doesn't pay much attention to task or result at all. Authority compliance is where the leader pays lots of attention to task or results and very little concern for people and relationships. And you can see as you think through that why both of those behaviours would be problematic. An impoverished manager doesn't do anything, nothing of either, and a middle of the road manager gets some way to being able to do these things, but not the whole way. So the balance is there, but they're not pushing it to enough of an extent. The third element of leadership theory, the third type that we look at in this particular unit, is contingency theories of leadership. And contingency theories recognise that it's, well, their approach, their research suggests that it's not about having traits, it's not about always using the same behaviours, but rather the required leadership approach will differ dependent on context. So what the leader needs to do and how likely the leader is to be effective will vary depending on the context that the leader's in. And different contingency theories focus on different factors, which include things like how the power of the leader impacts leadership. So do they need lots of power in one situation or not? How the will and skill of followers should be taken into account, how different tasks require different leadership approaches, or how different organisational features require different leadership approaches. We look at the contingency theory situational leadership too, which is a model that focuses on the need for different leadership in different situations. And you will hopefully have already read about this. If not, I recommend pausing this video and taking a look at that graphic before you listen to me carry on talking about it, just so you can absorb all the different things that are in there. So if you look in the top half of the graphic, you can see supportive behaviour and directive behaviour as the two elements that a leader can do. And what this theory says is that in some situations, it will be important for a leader to be directive, in some to be supportive, and in others, they won't need to do much support or direction, and in others still, they'll need to have lots of support and direction. If you look at the bottom half of the graphic, this is where you diagnose what kind of leadership approach will be needed. So within that arrow, those arrows, those black and white arrows, we're talking about the follower. So is the follower low competency and high commitment? If so, they're a D1, and they will need an S1 leadership style. So you match the number. So if you look at D2, that would be an S2 style that was needed. And what it's saying is, as a follower's competency at a task and level of commitment changes, the style of leadership that you might want to use would change. So if you've got someone who's got low competency but high commitment, then they will respond very well to being directed. So as a leader, you should be directing them, not worrying too much about supporting their emotions and the kind of the wraparound, because they're already committed. They don't need you to do that nursing for them. They just need you to tell them what to do. The reason that you see this line as a sort of snake from directing to coaching to supporting to delegating with the arrows is because Blanchard et al. Found that generally people progress through these stages in the order that they're depicted. So people needed direction, then coaching, then support, then delegating as they became longer in their role. So SL2 stresses essentially that leadership is comprised of supportive behaviours and directive behaviours, with supportive behaviours involving two-way communication, facilitating and showing social and emotional support to others. Directive behaviours clarify what needs to be done, how it should be done, and who is responsible for doing it. So situational leadership starts to show us that the context matters. But what's still ignored here, or only talked about briefly really, is the follower. So we talk about diagnosing the leadership type to the follower, but we don't think about the role that the follower plays in creating the leader. And so that's the fourth type of leadership theory that we look at. So various research projects over the years have shown why different sorts of relationships develop between a leader and subordinates. So that's LMX theory. How followers can have a more effective relationship with their leader. How leaders and followers can attempt to manage one another's impressions of the other. And the sorts of roles that leaders can and should play in managing followers who have performance deficiencies. So followers are important. We need to take them seriously because otherwise we can't understand the nature of leadership. So if we look at LMX theory, it's one example of a leader-follower theory. Again, if you haven't read the notes yet, pause the video here and read down this slide so you have some understanding of what we're talking about before I begin to talk. So LMX theory really was one of the first to recognise the importance of the follower-leader relationship to leadership effectiveness. In other words, a leader can't just claim they're a leader and then do leadership. They need a follower to be part of that relationship. And the quality of the leader-follower relationship will dictate how successful the leader is as a leader. LMX stands for leader-member exchange. So it looks at the relationships between the leader and each individual follower. And the theory tries to understand how leaders develop an exchange relationship with followers as the two parties mutually define the subordinate's role. And then exchange relationships are formed on the basis of personal compatibility and subordinate competence and dependability. So the two things link together closely. The basis for establishing a high exchange relationship is that where the leader has control over outcomes that are desirable to the subordinate. So, for example, assigning interesting and desirable tasks, delegating more responsibility, sharing more information, offering tangible rewards such as a pay increase. So that's good when they have those things. In return, a subordinate in a high exchange relationship provides benefits to the leader. So working harder, being more committed, being loyal, and carrying out administrative duties. So a high exchange relationship where the leader and the follower are very engaged can lead to high quality work from the follower and to a leader who has better leadership capabilities. So the value then of LMX theory is that there's good evidence that LMX impacts performance, organisational commitment, job climate and innovation. So it has considerable benefits to those who have a strong relationship with the leader, but it isn't fully explained how high quality leader-member exchanges are created. So the theory doesn't go as far as it could do. Finally, we'll look at the new leadership paradigm. And the reason we've got this graphic here is I'm just comparing the way that leaders used to be presented in the past to how they're presented now. We used to think, this is the Henry VIII, who was the King of England back in the 1500s. We used to want leaders who were big and strong and could fight wars and were very masculine and told us what to do. If you compare that to the portrait of the Queen of England by David Bailey, it's much softer, much nicer. She's shown to be friendly. We have different values essentially in what we want from leaders. We're not looking for leaders who are aggressive on the whole. We're looking for leaders who are authentic, who are charismatic. And this idea of the new leadership paradigm reflects that. So with the new leadership paradigm, it's a transition away from models that are highly practical and towards instead an emphasis on affective, charismatic and authentic elements of leadership. And there are two models that really dominate this field. The first is transformational leadership, the second is authentic. We'll look at both briefly now. So transformational leadership moves followers to accomplish more than what's usually expected of them, hence being transformational. And it's an example of a theory in the new leadership paradigm. It treats leadership as a process that changes and transforms followers. So if you look at the bottom of this diagram, you can see transactional leadership. So that's where a leader just offers contingent rewards and management by exception. So they just act like they're a manager. You do this and I'll give you a reward for it. And you get expected outcomes. What this model said, if you do that, but then you also add on idealized influence, inspirational motivation, intellectual stimulation, and individualized consideration, which are all explained in a lot more detail in the notes, you get performance beyond expectations. So as a leader, doing the contingent reward, you do this and I'll give you this, but then adding on these more inspirational and transformational activities will lead your followers to perform much better than they would have done without. So what we see then in this theory of transformational leadership is that you can have a leader who's laissez-faire, who doesn't really do much. You can have a leader who's transactional. So that's the one at the bottom of that diagram that we looked at, where they just offer rewards for what's done. And they do management by exception. So they spot problems or respond to problems. Whereas a transformational leader adds on these additional inspirational, intellectual stimulation type elements. We then have a separate model, but also from the new leadership paradigm, which is about authentic leadership. And recent societal changes, let's just choose COVID-19 as an example, but also fake news. These things have created anxiety. People are feeling apprehensive and insecure about things, whether things are going to get back on track. And they also are starting to long for trustworthy institutions and leaders, albeit different people see that trustworthiness taking different forms. There's no single accepted definition of what authentic leadership is, but the focus is either on practically how you can be an authentic leader. This sort of work comes from real life examples, training and development literature, or more theoretical research, which looks at trying to develop proper, robust social science theory of authentic leadership. There's a lot more in the practical realm than theoretical realm right now, but in the field of authentic leadership theory, we can see this model by Luthans and Avolio, and they present it as a process. So the idea being that you have, as a leader, positive psychological capacity. So you're quite a positive person. You have characteristics that people like, and you have a strong moral foundation. So you have a particular way of doing things. You have your own morality. You are changed through your life by critical life events, and this creates self-awareness, an internalized moral perspective, balanced processing, and relational transparency. Again, we go into these in more detail in the notes, and all of these things add up to create authentic leadership. So an authentic leader comes about as a result of particular psychological capacities, moral reasoning, and then these 4 other elements, including self-awareness. So you've seen then how we have 5 different types of leadership theory that we consider within this particular unit and the module of core management concepts more generally. Thanks for listening. Hope you found this lecture helpful, and hope you will be watching some of the future ones. Thanks everyone. Bye.